Good afternoon. My name is Addy, and I am your Unbound Ed facilitator for Summer Institute 2024. And today we're going to be focusing on supporting Gleam math instruction. So first, I want to welcome you all to today's session. I know we're all tapped in virtually, so I want us to build a community while we're here. And with that being said, I want you to share your name, your role and your grade band, where you're located, and your favorite math unit. So whether that's statistics, equations, just think back to either a personal experience of your own learning or maybe a topic that you've recently taught or a unit you've recently taught, and share that in the chat. Hello, Atlanta. Hello, LA. Oh, North Dakota. Wow, we have people from everywhere here. So we're going to get started with a fun activity. I'm going to give you a scenario, a mathematical scenario, and I'm going to ask that you tell me what mathematical questions can we ask about this given situation. So you're going to look over this situation and you're going to write down as many mathematical questions that we can ask of this given information. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, you can enter them into the chat. All right, ready, set, go. Awesome. So thank you for sharing some of your questions. I see we have some questions like, would the mean or median be a better measure of center for the center of this data? Explain your reasoning. That's a great one. So what I'm noticing about all of these responses is that it demonstrates a concept that we call Gleam here at Unbound Ed. And what that means is that your responses are bringing in your background knowledge, your cultural and personal experiences into how you think about this work. So as we get into exploring more on this through this session, I want you to think about how we can increase these opportunities for our students to bring their full selves to their learning experiences. So today's objectives, we're going to explore math instruction's current state, which has caused disparities in student experiences and outcomes across races. We're going to specify key elements of Gleam math instruction. Then we're going to explain how Gleam math instruction disrupts math instruction's current state. And finally, we're going to describe how attending to the math shifts supports Gleam instruction. So I am your facilitator for today's institute, of course. My name is Addy Salau, and I'm a math coach and culturally responsive education consultant. I started my career as a New York City public school teacher. I also was a New York City public school student at a Title I school. And my specific areas of content focus have been around math instruction, grades 7 through 10, all across the various subjects of math. And my favorite math unit is statistics. I think mainly because I just really love practical math. So I think I really just love algebra, statistics, anything that I utilize in my day-to-day life. Thank you for having me. So today we're going to be focusing on attending to the shifts of math instruction. So we've already touched on the need for Gleam, Gleam math instruction, and now we're going to be moving on into attending to the shifts. So let's begin with an overview. The shifts provide a frame that describes how college and career-ready standards raise expectations across multiple areas of students' educational experience, including instructional materials, classroom practice, and assessment. The shifts illustrate how these standards contribute to the transformative changes in the classroom that will better prepare students for opportunities after high school. Let's review the 3 shifts. So first we have focus, applying greater focus to fewer topics. With this shift of focus, it's simply stated to focus strongly where the standards focus, rather than racing to cover topics, a mile-wide, inch-deep curriculum. College and career-ready standards require us to significantly narrow and deepen the way time and energy are spent in the math classroom. There are guiding documents to help you do this, and we will be using them later today. Then we talk about coherence. The next shift of coherence is, I want you to think about how our grade bands are linked, and how information and major topics are linked from grade to grade. And so college and career ready standards are designed around coherent progressions from grade to grade. So within a grade, supporting concepts serve the grade level focus. So it's important to kind of backtrack, look where we came from, and then look where we're headed. And so that's where the coherence piece comes in. And finally, we have rigor. And there are many ways that rigor is used in education. And I actually think it's one of the highest forms of equitable instruction, because what rigor does is that rigor is about pursuing with equal intensity, conceptual understanding, procedural skill, and fluency and application. Rigor in this context is not about making things harder or more complex. It's about striking a balance between all three aspects. And we're going to spend some more time today looking more in depth at each of these aspects. But before we do that, I want us to revisit the Unbounded approach. So our learning is grounded in the intersection of standards, content, aligned curriculum, and equity, which is essential for closing the opportunity gap caused by systemic bias and racism, which we have to name here. The shifts of focus, coherence, and rigor are all essential to implementing college and career-ready standards. High-quality curriculum aligned to the standards strongly reflect these shifts. And content included in the curriculum and aligned to the standards also reflects the shifts. So, how does attending to the shifts provide equitable instruction for all students? That's the question of equity. Equity often centers around grade level learning, which is connected to the shifts and an element of Gleam. But grade level standards and an aligned curriculum are not enough. To amplify the power and potential of grade level instruction, it needs to be engaging, affirming, and meaningful. Over the next few days, we're going to explore the shifts through this lens of equity. More specifically, we're going to examine how we think about the social context, about our students, about curriculum, and about instruction. We will also discuss and practice planning and mindsets needed to ensure grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful instruction. So, by the term focus, the panel means that curriculum must include and engage with adequate depth the most important topics underlying success in school algebra. A focused and coherent progression of mathematics learning with an emphasis on proficiency with key topics should become the norm in elementary and middle school mathematics curriculum. Any approach that continually revisits topics year after year without closure is to be avoided. But by the term focus, the panel means that curriculum must include and engage with adequate depth the most important topics underlying success in school algebra. Improvements like those suggested in this report promise immediate positive results with minimal additional costs. And so this is pulled from the National Mathematics Advisory Panel that studied the relevant research to advise on improvements in the mathematics education of our nation's children. And within their recommendations, the call for focus was a priority. So with that being said, we start with focus because we believe that's the first thing that we want to really understand, process, and address. So why focus? Well, the recommendation from the National Mathematics Advisory Panel is from 2008, but there is still a need to talk about the shift of focus. Let's look back at data from the TNTP report on the opportunity myth. There is a significant lack of focus when only 47 hours out of 180 hours, that's about 26% of the time, is spent on grade level work. We must continue to strive for focus in our math instruction. One does have to wonder what teacher mindsets may have contributed to this data. So I have a question for you all in the chat. Why do you think there's more focus on assignments, or why do you think there may be more focus on assignments that are not grade level appropriate, particularly in high need school districts? Thank you for sharing. And yeah, my perspective as a former New York City public school teacher in a high need school district was that oftentimes there's this lack of confidence from an instructor's perspective around what students are capable of, given the setbacks that some students may face prior to entering the classroom. My experience, my students were several years below grade level. So when I first started teaching, it felt comfortable to teach the things that I knew they would be successful at, while ignoring some of the major standards that I knew that they would have to achieve. And it wasn't just ignoring them; it was just being unconfident about how to approach that, given the gaps. But over time, these things snowball. And so, one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a mentor in my classroom, or sorry, at my school, was to really dig in and dive in and make sure that students are touching the standards, because we're not going to close the gap by focusing on what's comfortable. We're going to have to help them with some of those micro skills while also keeping them on top of what they need to learn for that grade level or grade band. But thank you for sharing that in the chat. So where are we going to focus? So when we state focus where the standards focus, a reasonable question to ask is, where do we start? That is answered by looking at the clusters within each grade level. And so that's not a single standard that has a greater focus than other, but a cluster of standards do. Some clusters require greater emphasis due to depth of ideas, time required to master, their importance to understanding future math, and or the need to meet standards for mathematical practice. And these clusters are often categorized into three types. First, we have their major clusters, which are of our higher priority. And now these should take the majority of time, or the majority of time should be spent teaching this content. Materials should devote at least 65% and up to maybe 85% of the class time to do the major work of the grade. With K through 2 nearer to the upper end of that range, about 85%, and our high school courses closer to the lower end of that range at around 65%. The next are our supporting clusters, and these supporting clusters are the major work, support the major work of this grade. This could be in providing a foundation for mastering the major work, or it could be in application to the major work and learning new concepts. So basically, you want to think about these clusters as just a support group to accompany those major standards. And in either case, it's important to connect the supporting clusters with the major work that they support. So it's important to kind of map those standards together and see how they fill in those gaps there. And then finally is our additional clusters. Now, these are the clusters of standards that are not connected to the major work. Don't confuse these with additional or optional standards, because these are also important. And while they may not be connected to the major work within the grade, it is possible that they are foundational to major work in future grades. So just, the additional clusters, think of them as, you have to do it, but when you really break down, think of this as a pie chart and how you break down your time. If you're spending 65% on your major clusters, then you might want to be spending 5 to 10% on the additional. So that way everything has its space and its time during the school year. And lastly, to say that some things have greater emphasis is not to say that anything in the standards can safely be neglected in instruction. Neglecting material will leave gaps in student skills and understanding, and may leave students unprepared for challenges of a later grade. So as I mentioned earlier, in my school that I taught in, a lot of my students came with significant gaps and in their instruction, which makes me think of the snowball effect of skipping over standards, not teaching this. It eventually becomes the next teacher's burden to have to close those. So just keep that in mind as you think about the cohesion of your student learning experience. So now that we have a common understanding of what focus is,